Ireland's three-peat attempt may have petered out in disappointing fashion, but all it took was one wild weekend of URC action to jolt me from any Six Nations slumber. While Ulster were the only Irish winners over the weekend, all four provinces played their part in what was a thumping return to club action and a timely reminder of what we have to look forward to between now and the end of the season. On today's episode of the Left Wing Podcast, we will digest all the weekend's talking points, while over on the Indo Sport feed, Sinead Kassan looked back on the opening round of the Women's Six Nations with Ireland star back row Aoife Wafer. Now, for today's chat, I'm joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Jonathan Bradley. Guys, plenty to get through. Jonathan, after the Six Nations is wrapped up, sometimes it can feel not quite a chore, but low-key coming back into club action. But as I said, I'm bouncing into studio today. I know you're an NFL fan. I feel like Pete Carroll. I'm like full of energy. I'm jacked up to talk URC rugby. We had 4 one-score games with the Irish provinces over the weekend. Glasgow 28, Munster 25, Bulls 21, Leinster 20, Ulster 34, Dragons 30, and Ospreys 43, Connacht 40. Like, those scorelines alone will give you an indication of how much kind of exciting, dramatic, narrative-rich rugby was played over the weekend. Are you as enthusiastic as I am?
Yeah, there was a lot of talking points to dig into. It can sort of feel like these weeks between the Six Nations in Europe become dominated by people building towards the Champions Cup or the Challenge Cup in Connacht's case next week. But there was a lot to dig into. There was a lot of it felt like there were high stakes, maybe not so much for Leinster, whose loss probably won't derail their attempts to finish top in the standings anyway, but there was still an awful lot to dig into there. And I think across the board, just the jeopardy that we have in the ERC of the other teams trying to secure whether it be top 4 or top 8 means that it does feel like these games at this stage of the season really do matter as well. So yeah, it was a good weekend, an exciting weekend, as you say, in terms of the scorelines. And just as we've come to expect, Ulster flying the flag for the Irish provinces once again.
Yeah, as always, you can always guarantee on that. I think there was 30 tries scored in the 4 Irish matches, which indicates that defences weren't exactly on top over the weekend. Only 5 points separates 5th and 13th of the URC table, which is pretty crazy. Like, 1 bonus point win could elevate you all the way up. As Jonathan mentioned, Luke, lots to pack into today's show. We might deal with the games chronologically because there's a load of different things I want to get to you guys. So we'll go to Glasgow 28, Munster 25 first and foremost. That was on Friday night in Scotstoun. Munster 25, 14 up with 15 minutes to go. They would have hoped to kick on from there, but Glasgow, in the first half it was a bit of pace that undid Munster with 2 kind of long-range Glasgow tries, as we know they can do, and then in the second half they kind of battered away in close range and ultimately got over the line. A massive missed opportunity for Munster. Like, just looking at that table, they're now 10 points off the Sharks in 4th, which is that kind of threshold to get a home quarter final. So that looks like a very kind of tough prospect now. They could have really done with a win there.
Yeah, no, look, it was definitely one that got away from Munster, wasn't it? And I think they'd be a little bit disappointed with the kind of defensive showing towards the end of the game. I will say some great tries. Like, it was good viewing. I think those hard grounds, don't they make a big difference? It really was a quick game. Yeah, I have to say, I think they'll look at it and they'll think that there was a lot of those tries that they could have done an awful lot better for. I thought, yeah, tough one. The one they probably should have won. And it's a difficult place to go and get a win, isn't it? Like, so, and those teams have that little bit of history, that little bit of niggle between them. They always seem to have it. Yeah, one that got away, as you say, like, when you look at the table, one that that could hurt them quite badly, I think. We wait and see if that's true or not. But yeah, I think that the overarching feeling, after the game for me was, yeah, I was kind of disappointed for them. I thought they'd put in an awful lot of hard work. They'd scored some good tries, and probably deserved a bit more out of the game. But I suppose the game was won at the end, isn't it? And Glasgow showed that.
Jonathan, one thing that did stand out to me, and this was when the team sheets were named, that really frustrated me, Jonathan. Jack Crowley being held in reserve. They went with Tony Butler at out half, young player. Rory Scannell was in reserve, a centre by trade who can play a little bit of 10, and he did for the last 20 minutes when the game was in the melting pot. But, like, Jack Crowley lightly raced over the Six Nations, as everybody knows. He played 133 minutes in the Six Nations. Tom Clarkson played 20 minutes less and was flown to Pretoria to get absolutely, milled at the scrum by the Bulls. And I'm thinking, Crowley played 20 minutes more. Munster needed a win. It could be a season-boosting moment for them. And there's obviously rules and there's rules and there's rules, but like rules are good and then you need to know when to break them. And the idea that they'd keep Crowley on ice after a Six Nations campaign where he barely featured. I know he played the weekend before against Italy, so that might be the justification for it. But I feel like it's Groundhog Day again. But I think it's still worth mentioning that I think that was just a really bad call. It put Munster in a tough position. If Crowley plays just the way that game, ebbed and flowed, I think they would have had a great chance of getting a massive scalp.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably done in mind with how much minutes those guys are going to see moving forward for their provinces. Obviously, Crowley will be centrally involved in every Munster 23 for the biggest games. Maybe that's not the case elsewhere. But like whenever you look at the impact that the Glasgow bench made in that game, Brian, Fagerson and Duncan Weir coming on for Glasgow really sort of turned that around for them. It felt like the bench was sort of the determining factor when you look at how the game finished in the end. Felt like Glasgow probably trying to reintegrate their players a little bit quicker than we traditionally see with the Irish provinces, and very much a frustrating one for Munster fans whenever they see that sort of heavy artillery coming back in for this weekend with the Irish internationals, but not only the Irish internationals, but a few really key guys coming back from injury as well. The 23 that Munster put out this weekend looks like it's going to be so much stronger than the one that they sent over to Glasgow. As Luke points out, a really, really tough place to go and get a win. And it would have been so big in the table for Munster to go over and do that, probably unexpectedly. And now you have got that gap developed between them and the Sharks. And it's just, we know how important home advantage is in the knockouts, especially if you're looking at potentially avoiding that extra trip to South Africa as well.
Yeah, so a good injury update today. Tacker Abrahams, Craig Casey, Ollie Yeager, John Klein all look like they'll be available for this Saturday, where Munster go to McHale Park to play Connacht in kind of a historic game in the home of Mayo GAA. Luke, you were kind of shaking your head there when I was mentioning the Crowley thing, because it's interesting. We had a similar conversation after November when again Crowley was kind of ousted from the team, didn't play half as much as you would have expected to, and yet seemed to be treated the exact same way he was, as if he had started every game. I kind of wonder, is it the kind of thing like they saw Glasgow away in the sheet and said, oh, that might be a sticky one anyway, so let's maybe try to keep him for a game further down the line where we might have a better chance of winning potentially. But just when I saw the team sheets and I saw that it was, with all due respect to Tony Butler, still a very young player, your marquee guy in a big game like that. Like Glasgow away is a huge game in your league season, and again, I feel like we're banging our heads against a wall here, but there has to be more common sense applied. Unless someone can like pull out figures and give it to me and say, you're completely wrong, this is the right decision for how much he's played and how much he will play, then I might be swayed. But it doesn't feel like that when I look at it. It doesn't feel right in my gut.
No, but the first point you made, I think, Will, was that there's rules, but there's rules that you need to know when to kind of break the rules, and I think you have to have you have to apply a little bit of feel to these things as well. And you're calling it good, I'm calling it feel, but whatever it is, he hasn't played much rugby. He didn't finish on a great game. That would have been a good one to reintegrate yourself back in. You have 2 games now before your kind of Investec Champions Cup game, and you're kind of saying to yourself, okay, I'm actually going to play myself back into a bit of form. I'm more used to things. I got a big match against Connacht next week. I don't know. Just to me, it didn't make much sense either. And I'd say he would have wanted to have got back on the pitch. That must have been a frustrating enough Six Nations for him with kind of limited kind of game time. Now, albeit he gets in at the end, but he doesn't have the day out that he kind of probably anticipated or wanted. And as you said, I think the way they select the team or selected him before the Six Nations, I did think that had a bit of a bearing on who they selected, or very much, or how much they used him throughout the Six Nations. That's just my opinion on that. I think it didn't help that he didn't play the head-to-head against Prendergast in Thomond. I thought that was a silly mistake to make just from a personal perspective, but I didn't understand it either. So, it's I don't know. I think I always kind of wanted to play. I'd rather that they kind of rested him on for the kind of training, let him do some kind of weights and let him just do video work on a Monday, Tuesday, rather than actually not playing him in the games. Like, he's fit, he's ready to go, he's a young guy, he needs game time, the team needs him, and having done all the hard work and put yourself in such a good position, someone like him could have really he could have seen you out. He could have seen you out the last kind of 15 minutes. He's I think he's a big game mentality. He's very, very competitive guy. Yeah, I thought it was a bit disappointing. And look, it's not too much of a knock against Butler. Like, I didn't think he was too bad or anything like that. But there's certainly a difference between him and Crowley at this stage. And yeah, it just feels like an opportunity missed and a bit wasteful to not try and integrate him, or to not even have him on the bench, as Jonathan said. To have him somewhere.
Yeah, because like last time we saw him in a Munster jersey was that like kind of renewing performance against Northampton when it was probably one of his best ever displays. And like this La Rochelle game isn't that far away. Like what kind of lead up does he have to it now? He plays poorly against Italy, barely played the Six Nations. He'll have one game against Connacht in McHale Park, and then it's off to La Rochelle for a massive game. The Raj factor. It'll be one of the big Munster occasions of the last 10 years. Probably. Like, I would have loved to have seen him get a bit more lead time. Now, I will say, to flip that around, it doesn't apply to Crowley, in my opinion, because he didn't play much rugby in the Six Nations. But like, I watched a bit of Northampton, Leicester, which was on at the same time as the Munster game. I was dual screening. Finn Smith was brought straight back in after a lengthy, campaign where he played a lot of rugby. He looked jaded. He did not look. He needed a weekend off for sure after playing a lot more rugby than maybe he had anticipated. Like, even look at Saracens on Saturday. They lost in a poor second half performance. Like, Itoje was pressed back into action. I definitely think for guys who do play a lot of minutes, they should be managed. But for me, the Crowley one is not that case in any way, shape or form. As I mentioned, poor Tom Clarkson was on a long haul flight to Pretoria, probably with 3 stopovers, and then he was brought on to play the Bulls in the second half of a game we'll touch on in a bit that was very taxing. So,
but doesn't it feel like, Jonathan, I don't know if you think the same, but doesn't it feel like a more natural place to rest him after the La Rochelle game? Does that not feel like a more when you just think about where he is in his kind of, I'm not thinking about just the general minutes, but just if you think about how he's played, how much he's been used over the last kind of 10 weeks, that to me feels like a way better spot to use him.
And there's a home game, and there's a home game against either Cardiff or the Scarlets. I don't recall. I didn't write it down in my sheet. That comes like after the next European block. There's a later game at home that seems an ideal time, and maybe he'll get a second rest, but he doesn't need a second rest. Yeah, Jonathan. Sorry, I just wanted to give a bit of context there.
Yeah, like I agree with my instinct would be that building into that La Rochelle game, and again, obviously Luke would know far more than I would be that a player would want the extra minutes building into that La Rochelle game rather than going in for the Connacht game as your first action since Italy. You then got La Rochelle. If you get through La Rochelle, then you've got another game immediately the week after in Europe, and then it's Bulls at home, I think, is the game after that, which you would think would have been the more natural opportunity. The only thing, the flip side of that, I suppose, is just looking at it there. Tom Clarkson, 529 minutes this season. Crowley, 988 minutes this season. So almost double. So I guess we're not really making a strictly fair comparison because Crowley has played so much more. And I guess, as I alluded to earlier, it'll be Slimani and Furlong in those European games for Leinster coming up, whereas Crowley will be heavily relied upon, not only for the La Rochelle game, but Munster hoping that, especially the form the La Rochelle are in, Munster hoping that they'll have another European game the week after that.
Yeah, and I accept those numbers you've thrown back in my face to make me look like a fool, Jonathan. But at the same time, I was just merely stating the case of the Six Nations in particular to draw a comparison, because it's not as if...
Well, if you think about how he's been used, particularly in the Wales game in the middle, how so there's a bit of a block there. So you talk about blocks where you kind of get rest and renew yourself and you're kind of just training. You know what I mean? That's kind of
he played like 5 minutes against Wales, and there was a fallow week either side. Yeah,
it's only like 3 weeks. So sorry to interrupt. I know you were. Keep going.
It is funny, this sort of the different approaches that we see. Like Ospreys had to come out and almost justify the fact that Jack Morgan wasn't playing for them, and that he was getting a week's rest after the Six Nations that he had, but also just, I suppose, the mental stress of leading that Wales team through that Six Nations. And, they were coming out and having to explain the fact that he wasn't playing, whereas it's almost the flip side over here, where if Crowley had been playing, there probably would have been an explanation for why, because we've just become so accustomed to anyone in the squad, and even somebody as lightly raced as Crowley, not being involved in these GRC fixtures straight off the bat.
Yeah, it's a case-by-case basis for me. I listed a couple of English guys who were pressed straight back in. A couple of English guys weren't. And, you can definitely see the need for resting various players. But as we have outlined here, in Crowley's case, we kind of feel that maybe kind of straight back in would have been okay. I want to talk to you, Luke, about one player specifically from the Munster team who's an interesting case. Rudd actually mentioned this to me in the office the other day, and I initially balked, but then I came around to maybe some of his way of thinking. A perennial problem with Ireland over the last maybe year, 2 years, has been being held up over the line. We're talking about maybe renewing the team in certain areas. And Rudd asked me, who's the best player in Ireland at getting over the try line? And I immediately was like, Gavin Coombes. So Gavin Coombes...
I'm glad. Yeah.
Gavin Coombes in the last 5 seasons has played 98 games and scored 47 tries. So that's almost a try every second game. And I would say they've been cumulatively from about 50 yards, because it's like 1 yard per try. I would say he's the master at like those positions where Ireland are actually getting held up all the time, which is from close range and powering over. And that's not to say he should start for Ireland or necessarily, but it gave me food for thought anyway. Rudd was like, would you moneyball it and pick a player like that whose specific skill set is scoring tries from close range? I thought it was an interesting thought. I don't know, obviously, because like even to have him come in and do a PowerPoint presentation and be like, this is what I do, and I'm only half joking, like as in go to Caelan Darris and be like, this is actually how I do it, Caelan. What do you make?
Like Rudd's workshop in a column here.
I did tell him I was going to give him credit for his thought when I came on, and he was more than happy for me to throw it into the melting pot. But Luke, what do you make of that? Any of that?
Well, do you know what? It's don't put much credibility in it. I do find it interesting. There's 2 things I find interesting in it. Is that I do think I'm glad I'm not the only one who's kind of identified a problem with, you know, getting held up over the line. Like that's definitely an issue. I was wondering, was that just me, you know, seeing that in kind of big games? And I think they need to have some thinking about what's going on there. Why is it happening? Are they coming in too high to the contact? Are they, you know, like what's happening? Are they going for the line one too early? You know, or sorry, one phase too early. There's something to be thinking about there. I'm not sure Gavin Coombes giving a PowerPoint presentation or pitching them on tries is the way, but he is bloody good at it. And Munster are quite patient around there, I think, around the line. And look, I think what is interesting about that also is that he's not even in the conversation anymore. There was a period where Gavin Coombes, do you remember he had that brilliant match in the RDS where he was kind of one of the only kind of Munster players? I'm going to say it's probably 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, it was during COVID. It was 2021.
Yeah, but he was one of the only guys who kind of stood up and had a brilliant game. And we were kind of saying, okay, what's the next step for this guy? Where does he go from here? But like, he's been very consistent for Munster. And I just wonder why we haven't been talking about him a bit more. Why is he not, like, you know, like when he's left out of an Ireland team, we don't discuss it. And I assume it's because you've got Doris and Conan as a lion who's been playing brilliantly as well. That's probably what the hold-up is. But it is an interesting one that we haven't really discussed that much. And those numbers, whatever you say about it, like, look, I'm not a big, and it suits my narrative as well about my own career, about, you know, not looking at tries too closely because I wasn't exactly prolific. I think prolific would be a serious overstatement, but you have to marry that between being a good player and getting tries. But there's definitely a knack to scoring tries, and that's an unbelievable stat that you just pulled out. Was it 47 out of 98?
47 tries in his last 98 games.
Serious try scoring record.
Yeah, that's a record that Joe Rockakoko.
In the competition.
Yeah, no, 100%. And amid my joking, I was joking around a bit, Jonathan, but there is a serious point. Like, he is very good at getting over the line from close range. Like, I doubt any of his tries have come from more than 5 metre carries or less. That is something that, you know, the Irish team could learn from. And I would say Leinster to a degree as well, because I feel like they, you know, the similar players, they get held up a good bit too. Yeah,
I think so. I think, to my mind, and thinking about it more anecdotally, I suppose, it is decision-making from Ireland. I think they, especially if you look at the situations in which they got held up in the France game, it was going too early. It was taking, you know, a top penalty and diving for the line rather than displaying that patience. I would wonder whether the record of scoring tries in URC would translate to scoring tries at international level, where defences are more switched on, especially in that sort of goal line to 5 meters out. I feel like it would be much harder to score a try internationally.
Better athletes as well, Jonathan, wouldn't there be?
Yeah, like, exactly. Yeah,
guys. They're like the best guys in their team. It's 15 of the best guys in their local team, you know.
Well, yeah, I'm not claiming he should start for Ireland. I'm just saying that he has a skill set of scoring tries from close range that we've been banging our head about Ireland in that scenario. Is there anything that can be gleaned from what he does or transferred from what he does? That's more what I'm asking.
Like, I think as a part of a wider thing, like, it's something that I've been thinking about whenever we talk about regenerating the Ireland team. Coombes came in and made his debut during that 2021 summer tour during the Lions, one of 10 players that came in and made their debut. Like, none of those players went on to make a massive impact, or have gone on to make a massive impact during the years that have followed. Sheehan came in just after that. But if you look at, the Lions tour before that, where, James Ryan made his debut, Andrew Porter made his debut, Jacob Stockdale made his debut, it sort of feels now like looking back to those games against USA and Japan, where we all got very excited about all the players that were coming through. Like, I do wonder where all those players have gone. A lot of them have fallen off the radar. Coombes is probably the biggest omission, I would say, if you're looking at provincial form and why that hasn't translated into the international arena. As Luke says, we don't really even notice it when he's not there anymore, So I think whenever we look ahead to this summer and it being a Lions tour and blooding those new players, I think there would need to be a look back at to why that crop of 2021 players that come in didn't really make the step up to becoming test regulars.
It's actually an interesting point you make, because I attended that game in 2021. Probably the most depressing experience of my life. I was sitting on my own with 20 metres from the nearest person. The bars were closed. It was 70-0 to Ireland. And as you say, it was an interesting one if you look back on that team sheet. So many guys similar, kind of like Harry Byrne, Robert Balakoon, Gavin Coombes, guys who at the time, massive hype around. And for lots of different reasons haven't panned out. And that's where the Ireland team is probably lacking, that kind of generation, as you say, to supplement the great players who are there. Obviously, some guys have come through. Ronan Kelleher played that day. I think he scored a hat-trick or maybe even 4 tries that day. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting one for another day. One thing, while you just mentioned tap penalties, that I actually had forgot, but I wanted to ask you, Luke. How come a tap penalty on 5 metre line is either an intricate play or the hooker just taps it and runs headfirst into the nearest man with no in-between? The amount of mindless hooker running into nearest defender I watched over the weekend, I was just like, I guess it happens all the time. I hadn't kind of thought of it. I'm like, this is so dumb.
A bit of it, I think, Will, though, is probably down to the pace, though, isn't it? Like, if you're moving quickly, you probably go, well, let's just keep it moving, and maybe the first person there maybe just goes.
But why does it have to be the hooker? It's always the hooker. Why does it always have to be the hooker?
Oh no, usually they're a good shape. They're usually a bit quicker than the props in most teams. I'm going to say they're it's rare you see a hooker get bashed backwards.
Should be the 8.
Most of them are pretty dynamic, aren't they? If you think about most of them, they're usually pretty good carriers. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Like to my mind, I think there's 2 values in it. There's either you get to avoid having a scrum with someone or a line out against a bigger pack, or you're not confident in your throw or whatever, or else you're avoiding a scrum, or else you're trying to keep the pace of the play up.
I've no issue with a quick tap. I'm just saying, why is it just the hooker lamping himself into the nearest defender? Why can't it be the number 8 first of all? Why does it there's just a lot of mindless tap penalties being taken.
Everyone's kind of set up and close. I think yes, maybe the 8 is, you might have an argument, but he also has to go down further. They're usually taller guys. I think hooker's perfect position for it. I think there's a reason for that. I'm gonna put that. I don't have any stats on that. That's just a gut feel. But if you think about most of the hookers I play with, your Rory Bests, your John Fogarty, Bernard Jackman, Sean Cronin, all these guys had a nice little shape. Richard Strauss, they're kind of a good shape, but they were all pretty powerful guys, pretty kind of squatty. I think doing a quick tap probably suits that shape a little bit. And if you think, well, Sheehan's obviously a very tall guy, but Keller is a bit squattier as well, isn't he?
Yeah, well, it's certainly just something that jumped out to me after my 20th tap penalty in a row. I saw a hooker getting smashed. But yeah, look, maybe there's stats to back this up. Jonathan, we'll go to Ulster next. Ulster 34, Dragons 30. The Dragons had a penalty with about 10 minutes to go 2 scores up and hit the post from directly in front of the post, and Ulster profited from that. Scott Wilson with a great bit of play ultimately to win the game, stealing the ball under the sticks and powering over. He's definitely one of the bright sparks, of which there are not many. And we were talking off air, even though Ulster got the win, I've been quite alarmed from what I've seen from Ulster the last 3 matches in the Six Nations period and now. So they played Benetton away, got badly beaten despite Benetton having all their internationals away, and Ulster having welcomed back a couple of key guys from injury like Stockdale, Hume, McCluskey. You also had Nick Timoney playing that day, Tom O'Toole, players like that. So a fairly robust team. Then they had the Scarlets at home, barely won, were trailing by double digits in that game and just about got over the line. And then similarly trailing by double digits the weekend and getting the win in the last 2 games. But, there's a lot of narrative about Ulster and where they are and where they've fallen from, and I don't disagree with it. But when I look at the team sheet they've wheeled it out for the last 3 matches, the quality, in my opinion, they have in those teams. As I said, Stockdale, McCluskey, Hume, Michael Lowry, Nick Timoney, two back rows in McCann and McNabney, who've been part of very successful under-20 teams. Rob Herring at the weekend as well. And then I'm seeing the performances. I'm a bit baffled by how poor they've been, because two things can be true. While they maybe aren't good enough to compete at the top anymore, the idea that they're now only scrapping around with some of the weaker teams in the URC with that team sheet makes me kind of quite alarmed what I'm seeing. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming back to beat the Dragons from double digits down, yes, it's a show that there is an amount of character there. There was an awful lot of talk about how Richie Murphy gave the players a bit of a rocket at halftime and they responded in the second half. But the fact of the matter is, you're playing against a team that has won one league game all season. You're playing the worst team in the league. Now, there was an awful lot of talk in Wales that was the best 40 minutes that Dragons had produced all season. But at the end of the day, Ulster allowed them to produce the best 40 minutes that they played all season. Throughout the year, there's been an awful lot of talk about injuries. I don't think that really applies anymore. Yes, they're missing Henderson, who's so important. And yes, they're missing Izuchuku, who this time last year really had that breakthrough and has become a key player for the team since, in terms of his athletic profile, what he brings to the team, something that little bit different. So those are two big misses. But like you said there, you've got McCluskey back, you've got Stockdale back, you've got Hume back. Now, especially with James Hume, who was obviously out since the tail end of last season with a bad knee injury, you need to give guys time to work back to the form that we know that they can hit. But this isn't a team, I think, that can point to injuries as being an excuse anymore. And you're scrapping around, having to make really, really tough work of things against the Dragons. They came back to beat Scarlets. They did it earlier in the season when they came back to beat Glasgow. They have shown an ability to dig themselves out of these holes, but I think the more worrying narrative is the fact that they're finding themselves in them in the first place.
Yeah, and they've tough fixtures to come. Like this Stormers game on Friday night, to me, is kind of like their season. If they lose this, they still have to go to the not the RDS, to the Aviva to play Leinster. They have the Sharks coming later in the year to Kingspan and or Ravenhill. Like, who knows what kind of, that could be a fully blooded Sharks team with all the star players they have. I think they play Edinburgh away. Jonathan, am I right in the last game?
Edinburgh away is the last
game. That'll probably
Munster away before that, and they never win in Thomond Park either. So
that's a gauntlet.
Three of your last four games away from home. The Sharks game, as you say, is a tough one. Stormers are coming to Belfast off the back of a win, so they'll be feeling pretty good. And the table looks very precarious. Now, it looks an awful lot better than it could have done, because while we have this discussion, you do have to remember that they have won the past two games. But before that, they had actually dropped to 15th. 15th out of a 16-team league is stark, really, for the type of season that Ulster have had. And yes, there is, I think you said it in your original question there, there's talk about where Ulster are and a realism about where Ulster are in terms of fighting or thinking that they're fighting for the ERC title anymore, even thinking that they should be in the top four. But we're talking about a team that sacked their head coach in February of last year, whenever it looked like they might not make the playoffs. That was seen as the base level requirement, and now it's a scrap to make the playoffs that really teams from, you would say, 6 down to 15, 14 in the league are in. So it has been a massive, massive fall in expectation, in performances, in probably the squad, I would say, but that's been more gradual, where you're just losing experience every year, thinking that it's not, thinking that you can get by without that experience. But I think this season has probably shown that you can't. And then next year, you've got John Cooney leaving, you've got Kieran Treadwell leaving. There's talk that there'll be at least another retirement probably of a very experienced player. So you're going to be losing a massive amount of experience again. And it's whenever you lose those players from the top of your squad, it's how you fill it from the bottom.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jonathan is saying, Luke, in terms of at the end of the season, another period of guys leaving. But again, what do you make of the notion that when I look at that team sheet, that the guys there, kind of like that the point Jonathan made earlier, say that 2021 friendly against America, where kind of guys of that ilk, a Hume who hasn't kicked on at all and isn't a player who was, like Michael Lowry, Stuart Moore, Like, you know, Nick Timoney is a really good player, but part of a team that's struggling at the moment. Like, I still think this team should be producing much more than they are, notwithstanding the kind of external issues Ulster are having.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, they've never really won anything. Do you know, like that's been the big thing that's kind of hung over this team, is that they've had so many false dawns. I think the big point that I kind of would agree with you is that it's probably you always felt like they should have done better, but I think, you know, it's probably this team has lacked a little bit of, I don't know whether it's belief or a little bit of, you know, a little bit of different things at different times. I still think the discipline is a problem for them. I think they showed that against, was it Benetton, wasn't it? I think they had that kind of sloppy kind of period, but they still got a yellow card in that first half. You know, there's just, I don't know, there's a few of these things where you're kind of saying to yourself, you know, they're a difficult. They must be a difficult team to support, Jonathan. You know, I had a discussion with one of my old teammates, an Ulster man, and he was kind of saying, they're such a difficult team to support because you just don't know what you're going to get from them week to week, and that's something that I think, yeah, like I agree with you that they showed some character to get back in the game, but they're just putting themselves in these positions kind of unnecessarily and making the job an awful lot harder than it should be. And at the moment, it's kind of hard to see, you know, the improvement. As you said, that fixture list looks pretty daunting. And I'd be surprised if they don't come out of that a little bit, like if they come out of that unscathed. I would be surprised. I just think they just don't seem to be in a great place. And I feel like while they have one big performance in them over a period of games, and like I just don't see them doing it week on week. And that's been a big problem with them for a long period of time. It's not just a this season thing. You know, McFarlane got them fairly close on a number of occasions, but never really looked like being a really consistent top class team, even when you look at, even when all the big names are out, you know. So yeah, it's tricky. They're in a tricky period now, trying to find some kind of the next group. You would have thought a lot of those guys that are in the next group would have been kind of established at this stage, but they've had so many injuries. Like poor Hume has had an awful injury run. Stockdale's had an awful injury run as well. You're kind of big players like that. Like Timoney's been fairly okay injury-wise, but like Henderson has never been able to string for his whole career. He's a guy who kind of gets niggly injuries. He's a powerful kind of athlete. Izuchuku looks like a guy, I think, who's their next big player. I think when he plays, he's actually the best player in the team, if I'm being honest. McCluskey maybe could make an argument for that, but I think Izuchuku's like essential to this team now. And, you know, he's had a few injury concerns already in his career as well. You kind of would like to see him get, you know, put together half a season without an injury. You know, it's very hard in the modern game, but yeah, there's a combination of factors, I think, that are causing them to be inconsistent. But I just don't see the fix. That's the problem for me at the moment. I think it's a really hard job. And then you look at, you bring in the off-field issues, and nothing's ever really settled down since that kind of big issue. We won't get into that, you know, a couple of years ago. It feels like it's been, you know, financial challenges. It's been kind of PR challenges. It's been, you know, lots of things like that are bubbling in the background that makes this a tricky job to get right. And I don't think a quick fix still. So yeah, I don't know. It's I don't envy Richie in the gig at the moment, because I still think there's a cohort of Ulster supporters, and I think well within their right, but they expect the team to be doing a bit better and competing with more consistently, and they haven't got that. And I think I can see both sides of it. Yeah, you know, Will, I can see your side where you're saying, oh, look at that team sheet. How are they not competing week to week? But you know, there's loads. I've given you loads of reasons why they're not. But
I'm not asking. You know? I'm not asking them to go to the RDA or the Aviva and go to Thomond Park later this year and win. I'm just expecting them to be able to go to the Dragons, who've won one game, and put them away with the minimum of fuss, and not be requiring a penalty missed in front of the post and a scrappy end of game stand to get the win. Like I accept all the points you both have raised about issues and things, as I said, but I still think no one can convince me that a team with that amount of what I think are still quality players.
Can I be honest, Will? The more concerning one for me was the Benetton one away. I don't know about you, Jonathan. Like, I look, the Dragons, you can get a funky one. People haven't played together that often. They can have a big one at home. And I've played in teams where I don't know whether we lost, but we had some racy starts against Dragons games. Definitely, it was a tough place to go. The Benetton one for me was one where you're like, that just threw that away, and the discipline was so bad. That to me was a more concerning one, Will. That to me is like encapsulates what this Ulster team has been about the last couple of years. I don't know if, Jonathan, you're closer to this than me. Is that making any sense, or am I?
No, it does, because like good Ulster teams have not liked going to Rodney Parade. Now, I think it's been 10 years since an Ulster team lost to the Dragons away, but they have always said that they don't like going to Rodney Parade as a grind. You know, difficult to get to, small changing rooms, whatever. It's not a place that they like to go. But it's the amount of these types of performances. You know, it's the fact that they are getting in these situations time and time again. And like I like 100% agree with what Will's saying. I think there are people out there that are not saying that, which they were saying 2 or 3 years ago. Like, you know, it's 3 years ago this year was that Stormers semi-final when Ulster really should have won the league. You know, that's only 3 years ago. But we're not talking anymore about a team that should have aspirations to challenge Leinster. We'll see them play Bordeaux next week, and we'll see how that goes. But we're talking about a team that is in a real scrap to finish in the top half of their league, and that feels like such a big departure from the last, you know, really from, I suppose, 2011, 2012 up until this season, really. I agree with both of what you're saying. Really, I would probably fall in between that. I think this team should be doing an awful lot better, but the ceiling at the minute for me would be 5 to 8, and that's where they should be falling into the ERC. And I don't think, looking at those fixtures, that they're going to be able to do it. I think if they lose this week, I think it's as good as over, because I don't see them picking up enough points from those final 4 games. I think it's going to be tough enough anyway. A lot's going to depend on what sort of side the Sharks send over, because they are, you know, as we know, they're very unpredictable, both in terms of the team sheet and just their level of performance as well. But like Leinster, Munster, Edinburgh, all the way. I mean, how many points do you see from that? Like,
yeah, like when you're 2 home games left, they're the Stormers and the Sharks. You're not in a good place. I agree with you. I don't see them getting top 8. I think, as you said, if they lose on Friday, I think it's definitely over. Even if they win, I don't see them winning any of their away games. And as you say, the Sharks, they could not have any European interest remaining, so it could just be a case of them sending over the big guns to get as high a seeding as they can. So Scott Wilson, that's what everyone's pinning their hopes on in the short term. The prop who looks like a real prospect. So that's where Ulster are at. Luke, we might go to the Bulls Leinster game then. 21-20. The Bulls, with the last scrum of the game, getting that penalty. I think it was reset 4 times, and then on the 5th one, the power came true and they got a penalty. As Leo Cullen said, I thought it was funny. A long way to go for a losing bonus point. It's a long journey to make, and it was a very tough physical game. I think Leinster had 4 HIAs. 2 of them returned to the pitch, 2 of them didn't. The kind of attritional game you expect when you're playing in Loftus Versfeld. Not the quality we would have expected maybe from the Bulls. Leinster put them under pressure. Leinster had a stronger team than maybe when they went in the regular season a couple of years ago and got very heavily beaten. But anything particular jumping out to you from it? I have a couple of notes, but I'd be interested to hear what you thought first.
It's the power in the pack, isn't it? Like, I know it's not Leinster's first team pack, so that's the big caveat here, isn't it? But they struggled with the weight. You could see that, obviously the pushover tries, and then there's a few scrums where you could feel the weight coming through, could you? Couldn't you? So that's probably the big concern. I mean, like, I think the Bulls were sloppy, as you said, not much quality on show from them. They got split badly. Like, the Jordy Barrett try was a bit, hands deep, into the 22, pretty much a straight pass, and they're kind of gone asleep for that one. But there was still some good rugby on show. I think if Leinster, if their first team down there, they win that one, I think they win that comfortably enough. I don't think they get bullied as much in there. I think they got
bullied in the They got bullied in the semi-final last year.
No, they did. But I think they're in better shape now. I think you add Snyman in there. I think he brings you that extra little bit of weight in the row, which I think is essential against the big South African teams. And you add in that kind of back rows, your Conans and whoever's going to be playing there, like whoever's going to be on your bench, your Bairds. I just don't see that happening with the kind of full team out, Will. Certainly not to the same extent. I'm not saying you get a 50-50, but it's probably more like a 48-52 job, isn't it? It's not like a complete domination at the kind of key moments, which I think is kind of a little bit what we saw. Like, I thought they were lucky enough to not get a few yellow cards on the pushover tries. I think it was only because they were tries that they didn't get them. I thought Clarkson was lucky on one of them. But yeah, look, I think it was still a good performance. It was a good showing. I think Leinster are in great shape. similar enough. Well, I was going to say similar to the Irish team, but then I'm thinking about the France match. But I think Ireland, are generally a tough team to beat. I think Leinster are a tough team to beat, even when they don't have the front runners out, even when they don't play that well. It's hard to beat them. Like, it takes a last minute kick to win. So I think they're all good things that I take from this. They obviously, like, I think they're in great shape to go and get like kind of home fixtures all the way as far as they can, and they'll be bloody hard to beat at home with all the power that they have. So, I think things are looking really good for them. I think they'll also have kind of blooded in a little bit of depth there in a kind of fairly like difficult circumstances, particularly kind of in the pack. A few guys I think will have, it'll have been a worthwhile exercise. The interesting thing for them now is what they do next week, because they don't want to, we know what they've been guilty of the last couple of years. They kind of calm down at different points in the league when they should have kind of, put the foot on the neck and really finished the job. How do they go about that, knowing that they've got, a big match in a couple of weeks in the cup? It's interesting to see how they kind of blood people back in. So I'm watching that one closely enough. I don't know about you.
I'd expect them to not pick a very strong team next weekend, even compared to what we saw last weekend. I know Keane Healy looks like he's gone over, which I thought was funny. I was surprised at that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Dean Aber has maybe come back to Dublin. Someone might see him walking around the place in a coffee shop or something over the next week. Just because with Harlequins to come, and getting a losing bonus point is probably as much as they would have maybe budgeted for. That's more than they got from their South Africa trip last year. So yeah, but a few things. Ross Byrne I felt for nailing that touchline conversion. He was giving it the big fist bump. He looked like I've earned this moment. I've had a shitty season, and I get the unbelievable kick from the touchline. Unfortunately, it wasn't the winner for it from his point of view. Jonathan, anything jump out to you? I thought it again shows the value that these three marquee signings bring. I know there was some scrum difficulties, but for the most part, when Slimani was on the pitch, there was obviously a lot of difficulties when he left the pitch, but for the most part, when he was on the pitch, he was able to hold his own and yield a few scrum penalties. We've seen that throughout the season. He'll be a real weapon. Snyman was just Snyman. Maybe the occasional too many offloads. I don't know how many offloads is too many offloads. Sometimes they weren't quite on the same wavelength. And Geordie Bard, again, a really assured performance. They'll be such key contributors. Be interested to see if does Geordie Bard, he should definitely start, but will he start, I wonder. But those three guys generally are such weapons to have that Leinster haven't had in other years.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think on the whole, it was probably, I think you have to look at it as a fairly positive day. I understand that people might think that's a strange way to look at it, but I don't think Leinster will have expected anything really from this fortnight, because once again it feels like this always happens, Leinster, where it's fallen between the Six Nations and a European game, and you're not going to risk bringing your frontline players over. You've left some of your coaches behind, you've left players behind. I was thinking exactly the same thing about Ross Byrne. It felt like it was going to be another one of those Ross Byrne days. He seems to have quite an awful lot of those where, he's been either written off, or as we've seen, this year, where he'll be away, and it felt like it was just going to be another one of those games where he pops up and offers a reminder of like how valuable he can be, and how much Leinster will miss him next year in weeks like this. Obviously, Slimani looked better for every minute he was off the pitch, and that's no slight on the players that were thrown into the situation after he'd come off it, just with the way that the scrum went. But I honestly don't think it's that bad a thing for Leinster not to be, to lose that unbeaten record, because this is an organisation that, like, let's be honest, going through the season unbeaten doesn't matter anymore. It's like, it doesn't feel like an achievement, because all that matters, and we talk about this all the time, all that matters is whether they're winning one or two trophies at the end of the season. That's how we judge a Leinster season. It's by silverware. It's not how many ERC games they win. And I thought that going over, giving it a real rattle, and coming back, even if they get nothing out of this game at the weekend, they're coming back, and they still have that buffer to finish top of the league. They, I think, still will finish top of the league fairly comfortably. And even if they're not, they also know that they have that Glasgow game at home to finish the season. So really, if they're within 3-4 points, they'll still feel confident that they're going to finish top of the league, which will be important for seeding. That's all. It doesn't matter whether they finish top unbeaten or not, to my mind. Yeah, but that Glasgow game comes before a Champions Cup final, and they've been there before, and they've often, the Ulster game last year is a case in point. They picked a second string team. They lost. They went to Pretoria. They got beaten, not badly in the scoreboard, but fairly beaten up. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me. I know you have to shoot off to work. Really appreciate it. No, it's good. Thanks, guys, very much.
Cheers, Jonathan.
Cheers, Jonathan.
Luke.
Cheers, all the best, guys.
Yeah, no
Chat to you
worries.
soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, Luke, just to pick up on a few of Jonathan's points there. Like, I agree. Like, I didn't, watching that game, I know obviously, when you have one scrum left to see out a victory and you don't get it, it's going to be a tough one to take. But I did see a lot of positives. Like, I thought Tommy O'Brien played really well, and he's a guy I'm really interested to see if he can kick on between now and the end of the year. Like, the 14 jersey, I think, is a bit open at the moment. Jordan Larmour has been injured. Jimmy O'Brien's worn it before but hasn't nailed it down, I don't think. I think Tommy O'Brien's a guy people are looking to with the pace he has as well, as someone who, if he has a good end of season, maybe goes on that summer tour, things could happen for him. But obviously it's about staying fit. Like, even at the weekend, at one stage he had a big involvement, and then the physio was out, and I was already like, oh, not again. But thankfully he was able to get up and play on. Is he someone you rate highly, or what's your view on him?
Yeah, I really like it when I think he, obviously, some great hits defensively as well. Love that about him. Very committed guy. The top end pace looks really, really great, doesn't it? So, look, he's lots of stuff going for him. I think he, the next step for him is kind of what I was saying about Izuchuka earlier on, is that, like, you just want to see him have kind of a 6-month period where he doesn't have any injuries. And that's kind of the key thing for him, is that he gets some momentum to put pressure on the guys that are in front of him. And then I think, once he's there, I think things could open out for him. He's the kind of guy who, like, if you get into the Leinster team, it's not that far a jump to the Irish team these days, certainly anyway. So it could happen quick for him. I think the key thing is injuries. You can see the promise. You can see the power. Like, he's a powerful athlete, isn't he? Like, very, very impactful in the contact and very committed guy. So, yeah, key thing is getting game time, and that's the big challenge there, because you are competing with the likes of a Jimmy O'Brien. You're competing with, I know, a Larmour we haven't seen much of, but, he's competing with a very, very, it's a tight bunch, and differentiating yourself sometimes literally is just about kind of staying fit. Do you know that kind of way?
Yeah.
Like, and he hasn't been able to do that, and I think that's probably why we haven't seen him really kick on.
I think, provided he stays fit, which obviously is a massive caveat given his injury history, but I see him having a big couple of weeks, and then obviously if they get into knockout games and finals and semi-finals, potentially having a really good couple of months with that summer tour to come.
I think he's a more natural winger, though, isn't he, as well?
Yeah,
like, that's the one thing you'd say about his competition.
Yeah, like Jimmy O'Brien.
They're like,
yeah.
I don't think either of them are really natural wingers. That kind of way. They look like they're just kind of really good players, either a centre or fullback for me. His brother's pretty decent too, but I do think if you're thinking about a winger, he looks more like he's built for that role. Do you know what I'm? And even if you think about say Jimmy O'Brien, kind of similar. Jordan Larmour is similar. I know Jordan Larmour actually is probably more suited to being a winger, but Jimmy O'Brien more suited to probably, well, I'm not going to say bigger roles, but more central roles where they got that little bit more freedom, and maybe their kind of body shape suits that a little bit more and things like that. Whereas he looks like he's a big enough kid. He looks powerful. He's pretty good in the air as well. The key thing, again, we go back to it, is can he stay injury free? That's the big thing for his career, whether he kicks on to the next level or not. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see if he plays against the Sharks this weekend, because that Quinn's game is coming into view. Is he one of the players who maybe, that'll, I suppose, tell you a bit about what they're thinking is, if he plays this weekend, if he starts against the Sharks, is he really going to have started 2 games in South Africa, come straight back into a Champions Cup knockout game? He might do, because to be fair, Jimmy O'Brien's over there as well, and he's probably one of the guys vying for the position. So time will tell on that one. Some interesting contract news today. Sam Prendergast signs a new Leinster deal. I was thinking, how big a contract do you think that is?
How big a contract is?
Like, we're talking the dirty details here. It just intrigued me. I was like, he's played in the Six Nations. Andy Farrell has invested in him. He's not an essential contract. He hasn't played that much for Leinster and hasn't won anything with Leinster. So, is this a big bumper deal for the new kid on the block, or is it like a prove it deal? I don't know. What do you think, in your experience of rugby negotiations?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I would say, I'd love to know who his agent is. That would actually give you a good idea. No, seriously, just to know like how he kind of negotiated it, or because if he's got a good agent, I think he probably, like, I'd back him to go on to the next level, I think. So for me, what I'd probably try and do is I'd probably try and get a bit of a stopgap, and maybe try and be renegotiating just before the World Cup year. So maybe you don't get the big one this time, but you absolutely crucify them the year before the World Cup, and see, like, because if he has a big year next year, he wins a Heineken Cup, possibly is a Lions bolter. I don't think so the way he finished the tournament, but I could be wrong on that one. And I think Farrell loves him. Farrell absolutely loves him. Yeah, no, it's what would he go from? So he was probably on something like, God, he could have been on nothing. Like he could have been on like a development, like a 15 or 20k contract with kind of getting. No, he could have been seriously, and then he'd be getting kind of big appearance bonuses. So in my day, it was like 500 for a league win. It was. And he might have an appearance fee. You know, he might get an appearance with if you're on a development contract or something like that. So I don't know what it is, but look, he's whatever he played, he's probably getting win bonuses, and he's probably so for Ireland it used to be, I think it was like 2 and 8, maybe, or 2 and 6 or something like that. 6 for a win, 2 for an appearance, maybe 2.5 for an appearance. So I'm sure he was getting all those things. Will so I'd say he wasn't going without, but I would say he goes up to 250. Like it's. So yeah, no, it's a difficult one to gauge, that, isn't it? Yeah. I would say he's in a very strong negotiating position, but you still have Crowley there. I'd say probably helpful for him that the news has come out about Crowley, renegotiating upwards of whatever 600k and is on the table apparently from Leicester. So I would imagine that was very helpful for Prendergast too, to see what kind of goes on there, and maybe for the IRFU to feel a bit of pressure, maybe.
Yeah, there's always very interesting horse trading when it comes to contracts. I'd like the idea of being a Leinster player and getting paid 500 quid per win and just watching the URC table just cha-ching every single weekend. Finish up on Connacht then. Ospreys 43, Connacht 40. I think if you'd asked ChatGPT to create a Connacht match, this would be like what they create. Like, I think 12 tries. They were 14-0 up, I think, then 31-14 down. Then they got it back. Yeah. They got it back to 10 points. They were queuing up for a try. They throw an intercept that goes the other end of the pitch, but then they get it back to 43-40, and they're hammering away for like 5 minutes past the 80 minute, or 3 or 4 minutes past the 80. They were being pushed back, then they get a penalty and get pushed forward. And then eventually they come up short, even though there was a very blatant hands in the ruck missed at like the last play of the game that 100% should have been called, but it was missed. But ultimately it means that their league season is I would say, pretty much done and dusted. Like, they have 2 matches. We talked about Ulster's schedule. They still have to go to South Africa for 2 games. So I think they're down in 13th maybe at the moment, or 11th or 12th. So it's a tough road back for them to get into that top 8.
I think they're 12th in the league, Will. And in a rough spot, I think. Look, the same issues remain with Connacht. I think they're having real problems defensively. Anytime you're competing, look, they scored some brilliant tries. Some of the Hurley Langton tries, like he's pretty powerful out there, and he's a good athlete. And look, there was definitely some lovely interplay for some of the tries, but you cannot concede 43 points on a weekly, and expect to be winning that game. Like, they can moan all they like about, hands in the ruck at the end, but like, you just cannot concede that many tries in a game against, a team that you'd be probably expecting to have a close. It was a close match, but you're never going to win. You're not going to win many games. You're conceding 43 points. I just don't see it. So, look, the issue is fairly obvious for me, and they need to get it. It's probably. They're obviously hoping it's not too late to fix it. I'd say it probably is, isn't it? And they look like they're going to be under pressure. They need a massive couple of weeks. And as you say, a trip to South Africa. I don't know. I just can't see it at the moment. If you're that leaky defensively in South Africa, that only gets worse. And I think they struggle particularly against those packs as well, just because of the weight and the power in them. It doesn't look good for them, I think. Yeah. And they haven't looked like they've resolved some of the issues that we saw last season.
Yeah, and they have that big kind of money spinning or kind of morale boosting trip to Mayo at the weekend to play Munster, which isn't falling at a great time for them, as you say. Like, just with not only the defensive performance of the weekend, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes. Like, Pete Wilkins is off on sick leave at the moment, their head coach. So Collie Tucker is taking the team kind of. Mark Sexton is going to Ulster at the end of the year. Scott Fardy, I think, is departing at the end of the year, the defence coach. They're getting a guy in from Australia, I think Rod Sieb is his name, as kind of a senior coach. So there's lots of kind of behind the scenes upheaval, lots of players moving on at the end of the year. But I suppose the thing I'm looking at from their point of view is the Challenge Cup. Like, that's their one path, I think, viable path into Europe next year. They play Cardiff at home. If they win that, they have either the Perpignan or Racing at home, which is obviously a tough game. But you don't know how interested either of those teams are going to be in going in Europe, because they're both fighting at the bottom of the French league. So for me, yes, you want to put on a good show in Mayo this Saturday. You have a lot of supporters there, and it's a great moment for the province to expand their reach. But I'd really be targeting Europe in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, well, they've actually been everything we've said about them probably doesn't really apply to the Cup, really, does it, in terms of their consistency? Definitely, anyway. They've been really good in that competition. I'd also say I'm not sure Cardiff is an easier match than the other two. I think if they lined out their full teams, yes. But I just think, as you said, given the bit of context about, will they actually be that interested? Maybe if they go that far in the competition, the French teams could be. But I think Cardiff is a tricky game for them. Cardiff are going okay in the league. They're pretty solid. I think they're much improved. So that's not a walk in the park for them either. But I think that would be their best route into the cup next year. I think is through the Challenge Cup, isn't it? And they've been really, really good. So. Let's hope they continue that on. As you say, a lot of upheaval behind the scenes is not helpful either. For a team that kind of needs probably fairly consistent messaging, not to have that, which you'd probably expect at the moment, is probably tricky, and it's probably adding to some of the problems. Yeah,
it's funny, talking at the top of the show about how enjoyable the weekend was, and you look at Connacht, the upheaval behind the scenes, Ulster. Lots of kind of talk around the setup as well. Munster, obviously, Graham Rowntree. It seems a long, long time ago now, actually, funnily enough. But obviously he left at the start of the year. They have a new head coach coming in the summer. While Leinster are consistent, a lot has been spoken about the other three provinces. And while I kind of try as much as I do when I come in here just to look at their team sheets on a week-to-week basis and just kind of judge them off that, there are lots of issues going around in the background as well that doesn't make it easy for them to deliver as much as they should.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a completely fair statement to make. The one argument I would say is that with Ulster and with Connacht, right? With Ulster, the discipline for me is, they haven't sorted that problem out. Connacht, the defence, they haven't sorted that problem out. So, that's not that. Scott Fardy has been there last year and this year. I hate saying it, but they're. Whatever he's been saying has not been landing with the players, and it's probably a mixture of, with most things, it's never just down to one thing. But it must be something to do with the messaging. It has to be something to do with the commitment levels or the concentration levels too. It's probably a combination of all three when it's that consistently bad, isn't it? So, I don't know. It's while I think you're right, and I think some of the performance levels can be attributed to that, not all of it. Some of these things are well known and just require a bit of cohesiveness and a bit of cohesive thinking about it and saying, okay, well, we're just going to stop this. So, we might not get the results, but this is a problem. We can see it. For Ulster, let's stop getting yellow cards. For Connacht, let's tighten up defensively. Nothing through the middle. Your basic tenets of a strong defence.
But you know what? The funny thing is, I would much rather be a Connacht fan right now than an Ulster fan, because at least Connacht score 40 points, and they always over the last 5-6 years, they do play good rugby and score lots of tries. While it's also equally maddening how they kind of shoot themselves in both feet sometimes. I think they've only Leinster, Munster, and Glasgow maybe have scored more tries over the course of the season. I think I saw a stat, either that or I've completely made it up, but it sounds plausible. So let's just go with it. As in, it's an enjoyable team to watch as well, at least.
I wonder, is that down to expectation levels a little bit as well? We kind of expect Ulster to be
better,
maybe. And I wonder, are you kind of more disappointed off the back of that? But I don't know. I'm not sure I'd love seeing my team. I go berserk watching them concede massive amounts of points, having done the harder part of the game. To my mind, it's harder to be, and you see some of the tries, some of the ball handling, some of the lines of running, some of the tries are outstanding that they score, and the way they break teams down. I would find it really frustrating that they can't get the other part of the game right, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm actually rowing back. I'm rowing back already mentally about what I just said.
You'd be kind of going, oh, this is how do we score 40 points and we still lost? You know what I mean? That's what I'd be thinking. I'd be going, oh God, could I get down there and watch them concede however many tries, week on week? I would find that maddening, to be honest. But I would just expected a little bit more improvement, Will, from last year. Just we're seeing too many of these kind of big scores, I think, still from them at different stages.
Last thing before we wrap up. By the time people listen to this, and well, depending if they get to it today, I guess, or tomorrow morning, Andy Farrell will have named his assistant lines coaches. That's on Wednesday morning. Do you where are we now? Does Simon Easterby jumping ship with John Fogarty? Is it as big of a deal as I made it out to be, or have you kind of made, are you standing firm on your stance from last week?
I don't know. I still am not. I can see both sides to it, Will. What I said to you last week probably still stands, if I'm being honest. I think you'd never want to deny someone the opportunity, but I still think you have to respect the role you're in and the responsibility you were given to be the kind of head coach and steer the team through a period where Andy Farrell's not there. And I think I'm still in the middle from where I was last week. I do think there's good guys below him, which is what I said last week as well. Like, Paul O'Connell would be able to lead a young team forward, and you'd certainly be able to, get lots of information from him about how you should be acting, how you should be playing, what you need to do to be a top player. So I still think the framework and below the coaches is there. But yeah, I'm torn on whether it's a good or a bad thing, or whether they should actually want to do it, having been given such a big responsibility,
Yeah, I'm also interested to see if Paul O'Connell's Wikipedia page says interim and brackets twice, because he's the interim. That's what I really need to know.
Interim squared.
But no, you touched on it there. All jokes aside, like, Simon Easterby was given the honour of being the Ireland head coach. And now he's scrum halfing that off because it's just like to go and do another job. Like, just from that fact, I don't deny the fact, we discussed this last week, that like Paul O'Connell can blood players and what have you. But just from that fact alone, like, Simon Easterby's been given this great honour. And like, maybe I'm being too po-faced or being too like, this is an honour. But like, I think that means.
But he's
something.
Been offered a bigger honour. If we're going down that route, like, he's still representing Ireland when he's the British and Irish Lions coach. Do you know what I mean?
As an assistant, he's the assistant, though. I don't think being an assistant for the Lions is a greater honour than being the Ireland head coach.
It is, definitely. Definitely more prestigious. You're representing Ireland there.
The assistant. Like,
yeah, but no, you're still representing Ireland there. Like, and he's an interim. He's kind of an assistant coach here still. I think he's going to do the same job as he does with Ireland, but he's representing Ireland, the British and Irish Lions. So that's probably not the route I would go with it. I would say it's more to do with a responsibility to the squad, is that he's been given that to kind of steer them through what is. And we saw with Wales and Gatland, like, a difficult period nearly always. Like, Wales always had a tricky period when he was Lions coach, and then when he came back in, you saw the impact he had. He had kind of big success the year after. But it's nice to have a steady hand there, being left behind. And it's that's probably the piece. I would say it's the responsibility more than actual the summer tour.
The summer tour now is going to be missing Andy Farrell, Simon Easterby, Alan Walters, who's the kind of head athletic therapy guy, Vinnie Hammond, who's the head analyst. Not as if the players would be dealing with him necessarily. John Fogarty, who's the scrum coach. Like, you're basically like it's going to be a complete development tour now, it was framed more so as obviously development in terms of the teams you're playing, but that it would very much have an Ireland feel, and it was about bringing through young guys. Like, Simon Easterby was announced as the interim coach for this tour when it was first announced. So obviously the plan originally was for him to take it. Now it's kind of completely changed in its kind of makeup, I think.
Yeah, no, look, it's tricky. I can see your argument, but I think it's probably not as big an issue as we're probably making it out to be. And I think there's probably another side to it where it's an opportunity for someone else to take on the responsibility of being an international coach for a little bit of a period. There'll be there will be a bright side to this. We just probably can't see it at the moment. But I do think that there'll be there's positives on a few sides here. I think maybe the players are the only ones that maybe possibly lose out with a more experienced coaching staff, but it doesn't mean that it's actually that big a loss there. I think Paul probably goes on to have an unbelievable coaching career anyway, and he might well end up in the head coaching role in a few years anyway. Like, he's kind of built for the big job, if you ask me. So I think it might be a good opportunity to get him some experience. And there's a long-term side to this where I think there'll be a positive in this for both, for certainly for the management team anyway, which is clearer to see. But I think from the player group too, I think Paul would be great with the more responsibility given. We're obviously assuming he's the guy who takes the squad on. But it's an interesting question to pose. I still think you're representing Ireland when you're with the British and Irish Lions, if I'm being honest. It's the highest honour you can have in the British and Irish Isles, Well,
that's all we have time for on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. I'd like to thank Jonathan for joining us earlier, and for Luke for joining me for this week's chat. We'll be back next week to look ahead to a blockbuster weekend of Champions Cup knockout rugby. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on the Irish Independent website. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.